Outrage is justified. David Attenborough backs school climate strikers, environment.
Here's a summary of the article.
The outrage of the students striking from school over climate change inaction is certainly justified, according to Sir David Attenborough, who said older generations had done terrible damage to the planet. In an interview with the former UN climate chief Christiana Figueres, the broadcaster and naturalist dismissed critics of the widely praised global movement of school strikes as cynics. The protests by young people were enormously encouraging, Attenborough said. Their outrage is certainly justified, there is no doubt about that, Attenborough told Figueres, who delivered the landmark Paris Climate Change Agreement in 2015. There will be cynics who try to dismiss and say they don't understand the world and how it works, Attenborough said in the interview, released in a podcast on Friday by Figueres's Global Optimism Group. Attenborough recently presented a primetime BBC documentary, Climate Change: The Facts, which was watched live by almost 3 million people in the UK. The scientific evidence is that if we have not taken dramatic action within the next decade, we could face irreversible damage to the natural world and the collapse of our societies, he said in the show. Attenborough told Figueres action to stop climate change and the destruction of the wildlife was essential. We have no option, if we want to survive. We have a moral obligation on our shoulders and it would be to our deep eternal shame if we fail to acknowledge that.
This post received a score of 14,740, with an upvote ratio of 93%. Here are the top comments in response to this article.
Outrage was justified 20 years ago. Today, we need to start holding the people who allowed the problem to get worse accountable.
Yes, and do you know what the elite's response is? How can we control people with dog collars or rations? Literally this. Their vision extends to this myopic, pathetic vision of the future. It's in an article one read but can't find ATM. What shall we do with people who pose an existential threat to our species due to their ineptitude, greed and stupidity?
Greater than and what shall we do with people who pose an existential threat to our species due to their ineptitude, greed and stupidity? I suppose we could stop electing them to public office, for a start.
When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one group of people to dissolve the political bands which connect them with another.
We are having a flash sale on pitchforks and torches.
Our Pitchfork Emporium?
Normal person talks about climate change, fuck off. David Attenborough talks about climate change, he's so right. He's one of the few people whose mere personal experience could be considered a decent scientific data set on this issue.
That's an interesting way to look at it. You're right, he has been doing nature stuff for decades. He has been to places many years ago and then more recently and can see firsthand the destruction of our planet. Something like coral reefs doesn't take a scientist to notice the devastating destruction sweeping them worldwide. CO2 lasts for hundreds of years in the atmosphere, and then only goes into other forms of the carbon cycle slowly over thousands of years, or never. Firstly, this means that the carbon already emitted will take 40 years to reach its full potential. As the planet warms, the oceans cannot absorb as much CO2. Methane, which works on scales of hundreds of years instead of thousands but is much more effective at heating, will be released more and more on large swaths of land as time goes on.
Sounds like we need to find a way to master carbon removal technology, if we're to have a chance at this.
Carbon sequestration is only applicable at the source. As great as it would be, there is currently no feasible strategy to filter carbon from the Earth at large. Carbon exists hundreds of miles into the atmosphere, deep within our oceans, and encompasses an unfathomable volume of space. You can't just hook an enormous, fictional clean power source up to some giant fan and suck the entire Earth's atmosphere and carbon cycle through a filter.
This video was automatically created by Reddit to speech. The article and comments in this video were selected from Reddit according to their upvotes, and any paraphrasing was performed by smmry.com, without any human intervention.